Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Facebook Live with GAE. I am Lisa Morgan, a kindergarten teacher in DeKalb County Schools and the current president of GAE.
Sharon Doe. I'm a high school physics teacher in Augusta, Georgia, and I'm the current vice president of GAE.
Good evening. I'm Carly Shaw, and I'm a physical science teacher in Fulton County, and I'm the current secretary treasurer of GAE.
And this evening, we have two guests with us. We have Mike McGonigal, who is GAE legal counsel, and Grace Akan, who is our campaigns and elections person. So thank you all for joining us this evening. And we are going to be talking about the recent resolution passed by the State Board of Education. And one of the reasons we want to talk about that is because the three of us as educators, we, like many other people, didn't really know what was coming. This resolution came up very, very quickly. No, there was no public discussion, no public comment about it. And then you've heard a lot of things about what it says, but we want to talk about what does it really say and what does that mean for us in our classrooms. So, Mike, can you kind of give us the kindergarten, break it down so we can all understand quick and dirty version of it?
To be honest, I don't know if I can really break it down that far. One of the reasons is so much of it is vague and ambiguous. And I think that's one of the challenges that I have as an attorney is what does it say? What does it mean? What's interesting for me right now is what is the potential chilling effect it would have on the practitioners of, science, American history, social studies, global history. What is the impact going to be inside the classroom?
So one of the things I think we need to say up front first, it's a resolution. So it's not, there's a difference between a resolution, a state board rule, and a law passed by the legislature.
Right.
Am I correct?
And so on that point, a resolution does not have the force and effect of a law. Okay. It isn't something that's challengeable in a courtroom. Okay. It's something that can be looked at through a political lens. What are the political goals of this, and what is the real goals from that perspective? We were looking, sort of anticipating an actual rule to come out or be proposed for public comment today at today's state board meeting. Mm-hmm. But that didn't happen. So right now we're looking to organize politically, on the ground, gearing it up for the political campaign in the fall and in 2022.
Okay. So one of the things that really, let's just say it, that's how I am. Nowhere in here does it use the words critical race theory. And a lot of people had never heard that term before all this started happening. And Carly, I know you've been reading about it. Sharon, you've been reading about it. Mike, I'm sure you have, Grace, because we're educators and that's what we do. So we've been reading, and I know I've been reading different sources. But what I'm learning is what this resolution is talking about isn't what I'm reading that critical race theory is.
That's right, Madam President. Critical race theory is not a curriculum. And that's what the misinformation out there is stating that it is. And it is not a curriculum.
That's it. I don't know if I shared with all of you, I was working on my specialist in curriculum and instruction, and yeah, uh, critical race theory was mentioned in one of my classes as a theory that you might use when researching a subject, not something we would teach. So, Carly, have you read something that we all need to, because I think you gave a really good definition of it earlier.
Well, I said it isn't a program, a training, or a curriculum. It is a way of thinking about the world. And it actually started back in the 70s. And it was a way of looking at the legality of how things were being done. It was actually a legal term originally, is what I found in my reading. So it's not something new. It's been around for quite some time. And it was speaking specifically of how the law was affecting racial situations. I know now it doesn't just talk about white and black, it talks about Asian Americans, it talks about Native Americans, it talks about Latinx Americans. So it's a lot, very all-encompassing about our United States. And that's just some things that I was able to find out from some of the readings that I did recently. So I hope I'm shedding that light correctly.
And I think it's important that as educators, that we all know what something really is, not just the buzzwords. Because I have gotten email from educators saying, well, I disagree with critical race theory. And I'm thinking, how can you disagree with a theory? Because a theory, we learned about theories in science, and that a theory was what someone believes about how things work. And you do research to either provide support for the theory or not to provide support for the theory, but you can't just say, I don't agree with a theory. Okay, y'all are the science teachers.
Well, I think where the controversy comes in is because critical race theory looks at outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And while it's not saying that the laws or policies that were made were intended to be racist, but their outcomes seem to have racism embedded in them because they disproportionately negatively affect a particular group of people. Yeah. And once this has come to light, it talks about equity. It wants correction to those negative outcomes. And that's what it's emphasizing. And that's the part that a lot of people don't like.
Yeah, I think you're right. And somehow in all of this, and I don't know, Grace, if you can help us understand a little bit better, because I think this happened politically. We've been dealing in equity in education for years, because what equity means is that we try to remove the barriers so all students have the same learning opportunity. And the best example I can think of that of what we've been doing for years is we provide our special needs students with an IEP to provide them. They don't get the exact same instruction as our general ed students because we provide them something different to provide them the equal access and equity in what they're learning. But now all of a sudden equity is a bad term. So Grace, tell us how we got here.
Get here? That's a great question. While I can't explain all of American history, this, I would say, coincides with the general dismantling of public education, to be 100% honest. So we know that this, movement to sort of recodify critical race theory as something that it's not is relatively recent. If you're familiar with the 1619 project, that was a project to basically expose and to give access to students the real history behind a lot of the race relations that we have in this country, and the history and the history behind why we learn the way we learn history in our school. The response to that, unfortunately, was the 1776 project, which is essentially a PAC devoted to, for one, propping up candidates who are against, or sorry, candidates who are for censoring American history in our schools, and propping those candidates up in school board races, which, by the way, this year is a big school board year. But also to create this narrative that critical race theory is even being taught in schools, such that we can rile up parents to attack this type of teaching, assuming that that teaching was even being taught. So the fact is, in the state of Georgia, 2/3 of students, 2/3 of Georgia's students, public school students, are students of color. And we know that, and there's research to support this, that when you sort of wash over the real history for these students and portray them in a certain light as a different race, that turns into a negative sense of ethnic. And so, I can't really explain the whole history behind all of this, but suffice it to say, we're in a position with resolution where the state board of education can say, well, these are our founding principles, these are our beliefs. And that's just not the belief of most families in that does not reflect the beliefs of most school students and their families. I'm gonna stop talking because my dog.
Okay. And okay, so I want us to look at one of those things, because you're hitting where we have to look at what we are teaching and what we're doing in our classrooms. And we all know that we need culturally relevant pedagogy. Our children need to see themselves, no matter what, in the materials we are using. That's why I went out and bought stories in picture books by African-American authors, so I would have those pictures and those stories to read to my students. But it's not in our standards. It's not there. My kindergarten social studies curriculum, the only African-American that I am supposed to teach about is Martin Luther King Jr., because we have his holiday. When I taught first grade, we taught Sacagawea. Kindergarten, there's no women. First grade, we had one Native woman. And I mean, it just seems like it's common sense to me. Am I the only one thinking this? That we need to include more people. I use the example with somebody else. What woman did you learn about in Revolutionary War? Anybody?
Mhm.
Betsy Ross, because she sold the flag. There had to have been other people involved that did something noteworthy, but we don't teach our students about that. So I think, somebody tell me if I'm messing this up, but I think we need to be teaching the whole history, not just the little piece that we've always taught. And I don't understand why that's controversial.
Absolutely. We need to be teaching the whole truth. And because the truth makes some people uncomfortable, they are not willing to see that in schools. But as a teacher, when you close your door, you can teach the truth. And so the pledge to teach the truth, I'm all for that. Because when you teach the truth, whether it's for critical race theory or some other concept, the truth should be able to stand by itself. And I have a problem with people who have a problem with the truth.
Yeah. But, and you said it, Sharon, I think you got to, one of my real concerns about this resolution says that we should not approve for use, make you carry out standards, curricula, lesson plans, textbooks, instructional materials, or instructional practices that any individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress.
How vague is that?
Well, my problem with it, Sharon, is
Anything.
I'm not a mind reader. I'm not a predictor of the future. I can't know how students are going to react to a lesson plan. I mean, as an educator, I'm going to call y'all a liar if you don't say this hadn't happened to you, because I know what's happened to me. I've had this great lesson planned, and I think, oh, the kids are going to love this. It's going to be wonderful. They're going to learn so much. And they sat there and looked at me like I had lost my mind. And at the end of the lesson, they had no clue what I was trying to teach them. And I've even on occasion taken all their papers and thrown them in the trash and said, we'll try this again tomorrow. So it's going to be beyond impossible for anybody to comply with that part of the resolution. Now, please tell me that's happened to y'all.
Well, let's talk about this resolution, and let's talk about how it is connected to the letter that Governor Kemp sent to the state school board 2 weeks before they made this so-called resolution.
Sharon, you don't believe in coincidence, do you?
Coincidence, coinkydink. Something ain't right.
So, Mike, I'm going to ask you this question. Because you said this is a resolution. It doesn't have the effect of rule. It doesn't have the effect of a state law. It says in one of the ending paragraphs that the board will consider actions to put this in state rules. Right. How will that happen?
Well, they're going to have to, once a rule is written, the state board has to put it out for public comment, or at least 30 days in advance of the next meeting. And I mean, that's the public opportunity to ask them all of our questions. How will this be implemented? You know, as you're saying, I'm not a mind reader. As a lawyer, that's a due process problem. Part of the notion of due process is that you have to know in advance what is prohibited conduct so I can stay out of trouble.
Okay.
This clearly, if this were adopted as a rule, would be set up for a due process challenge. And you know, there are a couple of ways of going about that. But back to your question, it has to be put out for public comment and input to the State Board of Education. And, you know, really for that matter, the door is open now to me for public comment to legislators that support the resolution. You know, I don't see any real reason to wait until there's a public comment. We don't know, it didn't happen today. Well, tomorrow, it's not on the agenda for tomorrow. So I don't know when it's going to be put out. You know, they may be planning to do it closer to January, closer to the, you know, next year's elections, to really, you know, spin it up politically. So there is that.
You said it, spin it up politically.
Spin it up politically. And my understanding is, and Sharon referenced the governor's letter and the resolution, and I think it was the letter was timed right before the state convention of his party. So I mean, that tells us something right there, that it's geared towards people of his supporters. And it's not really a political or partisan issue. It's really about power and who has power, who doesn't, and how are we going to obtain power in this state? Because let's face it, the State Board of Education governs your professional lives. The state legislature governs your professional lives. The Professional Standards Commission governs your lives, as well as local boards of education, intimately regulate what you do and what you can't do in the classroom. And that adds up to political power.
Well, aside from that, what I want to know is, how does this resolution benefit children in that they only know half of the story? They're only being taught bits and pieces of the whole truth.
And Sharon, I'm going to go with that as well. How does it benefit children to say that teachers can't be required to discuss current events? How can you say you are teaching if you're not going to teach children what's happening in the world and how it impacts them? That's one of the things we try to do all the time, is make our lessons relevant to the kids. Okay. I know y'all have heard this from your students, because I've heard it from my kindergartners. What does this have to do with my life? When, that old, when am I going to use this in the real world? Mm-hmm. We've all heard that. That's how we make things relevant. I was thinking back about COVID, and if I were teaching, you guys are teaching science. I mean, weren't there lots of science lessons that you could teach that related to what we were dealing with COVID? Mm-hmm. I mean, even my science in my kindergarten is how you wash your hands so you get the germs to go away.
Exactly.
So one of our people that's watching said, how in the world did we get here? And I think, Grace, can you help us understand how we got here, that all of a sudden we're having a war in education about teaching our students what actually happened? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe this is a two-part question. Has anybody proven that what they say this curriculum has in it is false?
It's not a curriculum.
I know, but I know critical race theory is not a curriculum, but the things they're saying they don't want us to teach about, such as things in the 1619 Project history that actually happened, it really happened, right?
Yes, it absolutely did.
Absolutely.
It really, so that's what I'm not understanding. It really happened. So why shouldn't we teach that it happened?
Every time people of color have advanced in some way in this country, it's unfortunate, but there is a segment of this country that feels threatened by it and feels the need to retaliate. That's, if you want to talk the politics of it. I would venture to say that this, unfortunately, is in response to what we saw at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, where people don't want that to be in the history books because it reflects poorly on them. I would also venture to say that we are moving into a time, again, I can't explain all history, but we are moving into a time where it's perfectly normal for people to create false equivalence between the truth and a lie, or the truth, or excuse me, facts and fiction, where we have quote unquote alternative facts. And I really,
Same thing.
and I really think that it is also a sort of a unintended consequence of our electorate not paying attention and not holding our elected officials accountable, and in many ways giving them excuses, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who serve us. And that's why I think, you know, I have a personal problem with the Senate or the State Board of Education's resolution, because they're supposed to represent public education. They're supposed to do what's right for public education. But all the attacks on the truth and on facts, plus the dismantling of public education, I think that's how we got here.
Kind of see this resolution as a test as well. Well, we're going to make this resolution to see if anyone makes a fuss about it. You know, that's how I kind of see it as well. If educators had got on board and said, no, we're going to teach the truth, and no, we don't agree. Now, there are some people who do agree with the resolution. So I don't discount those people, because they're entitled to their opinion just as everybody else is. However, when you look at the totality of everything that's going on, it kind of ties into what Grace said, as it being related to January 6th, those happenings and what's going on in our country today.
And I'm going to bring January 6th into this a little bit more, because I don't know if you all know this, but there was an educator in Georgia who lost his job because students in his classroom were discussing what happened January 6th. And he was called into the principal's office and told, you teach language arts, not government, not history. So you should not have allowed your students to talk about this. And there's no place for that in our school. Now, unfortunately, he was not a member. So we can't help him. So I think that's my thing tonight for those of you who might be watching us who are not yet a member, because this to me, and I'm sitting here touching the resolution, it seems like more than ever before, we are going to have to be ready to stand up for each other as educators. And we have to have an organization like GAE that will stand up for us when we are doing the right thing to teach our students.
When we're teaching the truth to our students, it can't be the truth according to so-and-so. It's got to be the truth. And already we're having issues with teaching the full truth about many of our American citizens and things that have happened to them throughout the history of the United States, starting with Columbus that came over here. I mean, I have Native American in my family and we still celebrate Columbus Day, and he didn't find anything. He made a mistake. And that may be a very unpopular opinion, but it's the truth.
Right.
So it really is such a charged topic, because some of us do feel so strongly about what's being taught as the truth, and the truth according to whom.
And that goes back to those facts thing that, you know, the facts are the facts. And I feel like in some ways, and maybe I'm wrong about this, after reading the resolution, that some people want us to teach an opinion about our country rather than an opinion that they want to be true rather than the reality. And that's what I keep thinking, well, one of the standards and one of the things we're supposed to be teaching is how to determine fact and opinion, and how to critically think about what we're talking about and how to draw conclusions based on evidence and not fact. And I feel like maybe I'm wrong, but and we're on Facebook tonight, but you know, we all have friends. We all know people who, if I saw it on Facebook, it must be true. And, you know, we don't need to be teaching based on if I saw it on Facebook, it must be true. Or even if I saw it on some, on the internet, or I'm thinking some TV channel, you know, we really have to think about critically about what we're seeing and what we're being told, because if it walks like a duck and sounds like a duck, it's probably a duck. But if it walks like a dog and sounds like a dog and it's got a, and there, somebody's telling you it's a duck, it's not a duck. That's kind of where
Lisa, I was thinking about this, like how we are with this whole debate forced, it's almost like a distraction because we're forced to discuss and debate whether or not the sky is a pineapple. We all know that the sky is not a pineapple, right? We all know that the sky is blue. We all know that there are properties of clouds and all that other stuff. It is not a pineapple. That is indisputable. And yet here we are discussing it. And I feel like that is also a political angle of this, to distract us from some of the other efforts to dismantle a public education. I mean, even the fact that the rule wasn't proposed for this board meeting makes me think that there are some other things, there are some other forces at play that we need to, you know, be mindful of. So
Oh, you just said a mouthful then.
really.
Go ahead.
And I'm going to remember that, because it's true. You know, it really is. Because what are we doing tonight? We're sitting here having to talk about this. We're not talking about the teacher keys appeal, that all our school boards are supposed to have that policy in place by July 1st. We're not talking about the American Rescue Plan money and how that needs to be spent for our schools. You know, we're not talking about redistricting and how they're going to draw the line so that we can be represented by our officials. We're talking about the sky and a pineapple. I'm gonna remember that one. I'm gonna remember that one so well. And one of our people watching has pulled up the Georgia Standards for Excellent for Social Studies information processing skill. Distinguish between fact and opinion, and that should be mastered by the end of 3rd grade.
It'd be really hard to do if this becomes a rule or a law.
Yes. Mike, go ahead. I saw you were about to say something.
Things. One is I agree with Grace, is what she said, that this very much is a part of a you know, you have to connect the dots, and it's part of this example is part of a movement to undermine public education that's been going on in Georgia for over 20 years. We've seen the rise of first startup charter schools and conversion charter schools. We then saw charter school system waiver law in 2008. And, you know, then after we had the financial crisis, we saw that the idea that a school district was forced to choose what sort of model it wanted to be, how to deliver public education, traditional, strategic waiver, or charter school system waiver. And all of those are ways to develop the whole language set of privatization, that in this public good, which education is a public good, you introduce private free market concepts, and that the whole language of competition, you know, is good, merit pay is good, that waiving laws like you waive, the oppressive, like laws on private business, then you then allow that from that freedom, you'll see student achievement go through the roof, and there's no data whatsoever to support any of these waiver laws whatsoever. But it is part of an effort. This is another example, the latest effort to undermine people's faith in what we're about. In public education, part of it is, for me, is, as I said, it's a public good that, to paraphrase, one of the founding fathers, it's to produce or make educated citizens so that they can meaningfully participate in the democratic process. And that includes voting and voter rights. And so that's how I make the connection between the Voter Integrity Act of 2021 to a direct attack, another direct attack on undermining public education, because voting rights and democratic citizen rights in public education are not two separate narratives, they're one narrative. And that's we need to keep reminding people that of that single narrative, that public education is there as a public good. It isn't anything to, privatize and undermine, and now we're being used as another, target to bash and undermine. And at some point, it will stop. It will stop, but only through, concerted political activity, on a mass scale. And we're already, we're seeing signs of that, but.
Well, the governor has said that critical race theory is dangerous and anti-American. And my question to him is how? I would even question him as to how he defines American. And then I would challenge him and say, well, how is critical race theory anti-American?
Sharon?
An answer.
Sharon?
Yes.
I'm going to answer that question, and there are going to be people who aren't going to like my answer, but it's what I believe is the truth. Because in his mind, to him, anything that challenges our history that was based and built on the stories of white men and the belief that white people were better is anti-American. And we know that's not right, but let's be real. That's been what our history has been. Okay. And how can you deny that the Constitution says a Black man counted as 3/5? You can't deny that that's in the Constitution.
Right. Right.
Everybody can read it.
Right.
And your choice is either to say, yes, it's there, and I'm going to be a better person than that, and I am going to treat all people the way I want to be treated, and I'm going to acknowledge it, and I'm going to try to give other people a hand. Or you can say, I don't want to acknowledge it, and it's un-American if I do.
Right. And another interesting strand in the resolution is that it attempts to completely ignore group identity. It seems to really focus on the individual rights and individuality and individualism, to the almost total exclusion of group identity. And for me, that's part of the answer to the question, how did we get here? Well, you ignore people of color. You ignore one group, and you only recognize the dominant group, which are people that look like me from Europe. I'm of most recent European descent. I mean, you can look and you can tell. but that is the dominant group, and that's the resolution really really ignores group identity, which again, the Constitution was written by one group identity, and ignores the the nations that were here before we claimed our own nationhood through the revolution. There were nations of indigenous people already here, and they were not counted in the Constitution, except that we were going to treat them separately, in their own little tribal communities. And that continues to today, and that's another facet of history that is yet to be explored.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's like there is a quote unquote dominant group, but the real threat is the fact that you're not going to be the dominant group in the next decade. I mean, demography projects that Georgia will become a minority state within the next decade. And I think that's what makes people who are proponents of censoring American history and this resolution in particular support this type of policies. I also wanted to correct myself. I said 2/3 of Georgia public school students are people of color, but it's actually 3/5. So 60%, which I'm not good at math, but that's kind of close. And the other thing I wanted to say was that when it comes to these power plays right before, the GOP convention, for example, I think we do need to consider also there were special elections that there were 3 actually, or excuse me, 2 recently, one in Cobb County, which we know that particular district, House District 34, is a Republican, or was held by a Republican. And there was very high turnout in that race, such that Republicans came out more than expected. And I'm pretty sure that this issue drove that turnout. So it does in many ways have to do with the fact that people feel threatened, white people feel threatened. I'm just going to keep it 100.
And going back to what Mike said about some people thinking that there was no history here in the Americas until a certain group came, Rick Santorum basically said that in public. So nothing surprises me anymore. Nothing surprises me anymore.
But, and I'm going to say this, and I'm probably going to have people not happy with me too. We as educators should be better than that. We as educators should be the group that is trying to teach the entire history. We as educators should be caring that, I'm going to go back to something I said earlier, we are using culturally relevant pedagogy, that we are making sure we have the cultural competence to interact with our students and relate with our students and reach all of our students. And I think part of this too, Grace, you said 60% of our public school students are children of color. That's another reason, we saw it. Y'all go pull out your No magazine if you're a GAE member and read that article about the racist beginnings of school vouchers. It was because the white people said their kids weren't going to that school. And I think we're seeing some more of that now. And maybe that's why we're seeing the voucher bills being so big right now, is because we've got people who are saying, well, my kids aren't going to school with those kids. And that's a real problem to me anytime we say those kids, because those kids are just like your kids.
That's right. That's right. I wanted to say, just throw in, you know, why, to me, why this is important for GAE. And to me, we're the product of a merger between two separate, segregated organizations. One, one white, one black, African-American came together under really the promise of fundamental equality of people. And you're right, as educators, that should be one of our guiding principles. And the merger isn't a discrete event that happened like 52 years ago, because it is so tied to the unfolding of equality. If you think of history as a movement forward, equality and its all of its struggles with all of us together is happening now, even in this conversation we're having tonight. But because GAE is founded on that premise, to me, that's why GA should be involved in this discussion, as well as the voter integrity law of 2021, because they're so intimately wrapped up with the notions of public education, democracy, and educated citizenry, and fundamental equality of all people.
And isn't the point of education for the students to be able to survive without the teacher and think for themselves? Isn't that what we want to do, is raise productive citizens and not educated idiots? I mean,
But yes, Carly. But I've heard from some people that say that our intentions are exactly the opposite. Okay, so that's another thing in this that I've even had members say, well, whose facts? And I said, well, there are nobody owns facts. Facts are facts.
And I haven't read anywhere where critical race theory says don't teach something that we're already teaching. What it's saying is add to it, add the rest of the story. That's all it's saying.
Right.
Tell the rest of the truth.
And one of the things that concerns me, and I know we're getting close to the end of our time, so I think we have to address this as well, that now things that we have been doing and we know are good for our students are all of a sudden becoming bad things as well. Just because people hear the word diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's something that we've all been working toward. That's something that but now that's a bad thing. Social and emotional learning. We all know that's something that we have been working in education because we recognize that our children and our students, we need to be dealing with those social and emotional issues in our classrooms. And now, just because it has the word social and emotional, social in it, all of a sudden it's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of people maybe they need to come back to our classrooms to learn those critical thinking skills, but it's going to cause harm to all our students if they lose these things that we know they need, and we cannot teach them the full reality, the full truth. That's the thing. I don't know if y'all saw the same cartoon I saw, but I saw a cartoon with a little boy, and he was looking at the teacher, and he was talking about the Tulsa massacre, and he said, "What else didn't you teach me?"
Mm.
That's deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As educators, we have that place in our students' lives. We have that trust of the community. And I think when, I may be wrong, but I think when they're saying these are divisive concepts, I think part of it is they are trying to divide educators and reduce the respect people have for educators throughout this, because that's one way that they can then reduce our voice when they try to do the things that harm public education.
And I think as educators, we have to be the most open-minded people there are. Because we know that we have children of all different backgrounds coming into our classroom. And we're dedicated to each and every one of them. So we have to keep an open mind.
Right. We do. We do. So we know this is not going to be brought up. There's no rules that were proposed today that will go to the state board tomorrow. Is it likely that there will be rules or
Legislation,
legislation?
don't know, or both.
Or both.
Or both?
Hmm?
Or both, okay. So, our members, if you have questions about this topic, I really want them to reach out to us. I want them to look at the whole picture. We started tonight saying this is not, it's not about a specific group. It's about our students. It's about public education. And we all need to look at, bottom line, end of the day, every single thing we look at, is this going to benefit our students? And I think that's where some people may read this resolution, and if you don't really understand, it did a very good job of not saying exactly what it was talking about. You know?
Very little specifics in the whole resolution.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
a lot of vagueness.
I also noticed that during the actual hearing or meeting, which was all audio and no video, so you can see their faces, but they, the proponents of it were very adamant about what it was not. And I thought we were there to discuss what it was, or at least that they were there to discuss what it was. And so I think that also is a red flag.
Yeah. And one of the things, I listened to that meeting as well. One of the things that really, I'm just going to be blunt about it. People may not like it, but I think we have to say it. When there were members of the board who said, I oppose this because this is dismissing my life and my children's lives. And board members said, I respect that. If you truly respect when somebody tells you this is dismissing me, you don't then vote for it.
What was that thing that you said at the very beginning of our discussion about the resolution and what it said about what it couldn't do to children, like make them feel?
Let me find it again because I read it. Discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress.
Isn't that exactly what this parent was saying, that they felt their children would feel if they weren't taught the whole truth and not just someone's version of facts?
Yeah, Carly, I hadn't made that connection. You just made it for us. But yes, that was what they were saying. They were saying this resolution makes me feel this way. And the other people said, well, I respect you. But if you truly respected them, you would have not just heard what they said, you would have listened and said, then if this is causing you to feel that way, then we shouldn't be passing it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the other thing I said about that was, I don't know any teacher who is going to teach anything that they think will cause harm to a child.
Absolutely not.
We deal with tough issues in our classroom every single day in a developmentally appropriate way. So why wouldn't we deal with the other tough issues in a developmentally appropriate way? That's what educators do.
In one of the articles I read, it actually said that some people were against the social emotional learning, but they felt like it came about through the critical race theory. And I just, wow.
I didn't realize that Maslow was a proponent of critical race theory all those years ago.
It's interesting, the information that's out there.
Yeah.
It's so important that we help sift through it and determine what is the right thing to do for our students, and then do that right thing.
We have two people that are watching us that have asked questions, and I do want to answer them. One asked, do we begin our letter writing campaign now? And we will let you know when it is time to start writing those letters. And then the other said, where do we go from here? And where we go from here, one of the things, and I'm sure this is going to be in our e-newsletter that goes out hopefully tomorrow. And it will be all over my Facebook. And you can also go to our campaigns page where we will put information. But one of the things we're doing going from here, next Tuesday night at 6 p.m., we are going to have a training for all of us as educators in implicit bias. And that's actually one of the things that this resolution says that we're not supposed to learn about. But we all need that training. We all need to learn more and be ready to, in our classrooms, know how we are acting and how we are treating our students. And this is one of the things that we as educators need to set the example. So we will have that training coming up on our GAE.org campaigns page is where we have all of the information as it comes. And should there be a rule when it is time to write the letters, it will be there. And I'm going to ask Carly's question, so we'll all end with the smile. When we start our letter writings, it's going to be 2 clicks, right, Grace?
You know it.
Okay, great.
You know it.
Oh no, and we froze Grace on that one, I think.
I'm gonna throw some social media posts on.
Okay, so you're going to put them on the campaigns page and on the president's page, right? In our comments.
Sure, yeah.
We will have those there. And we have a member who said he's glad that GAE will have his back when he teaches current issues classes next year. You know, that is one of the interesting things. We have schools that actually have classes in current issues. So we have been teaching this. I hope we've been able tonight to help people understand what this is all about and help people understand that I feel like critical race theory and diversity and equity, inclusion, all of a sudden has become the big bad wolf, but is not really the big bad wolf.
And I'm just sitting here thinking about all of those feelings that you and Carly just talked about. And I thought about all of the feelings that those groups that experience this institutional and systemic racism feel.
Right.
And at the time, they had no control over anything. And here these people have control over the resolutions and on the State Board of Education. I don't see why they don't see themselves in other groups,
Right.
you know?
I wish we could understand why they didn't, Sharon. And I wish we could teach them, because they're not ever going to be able to experience it, but they should have enough empathy and humanity about them that they would try to understand. And that I guess even more than that, that when someone tells you, I feel this way, that you would simply accept it and say, how can I fix it?
Exactly.
That's the start.
Mhm.
I hope so. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And we will be back with another session after the 4th of July, because we are going to do our training next week. And then the following week, we will all be participating in the NEARA, and it's going to go on, it seems like forever, but I'm sure some of these issues will come up there. So thank you all, and you all have a great evening.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.